Since everything is conscious at some level, it can be communicated with. Now, that's the understanding that you find in all the different systems and traditions all over the planet of what we call today shamanism. Shamanistic understandings that everything is conscious and everything can be communicated with if you can shift your awareness to its level to communicate with it.
Welcome to another episode exploring evolution. I'm your host, Amanda Zane, and it's time to remember your powers. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm so excited for today's episode because it's very dear to my heart as I have become so close with the person we're featuring today. And it's not a podcast like you would normally think. No, I had to give you a lot of information in one short time. So I got the permission of our guest, the esteemed Dr. Robert J. Gilbert, who is on the Sacred Geometry show on the Gaia Network. He wrote every episode himself and has been in this science, the vibrational science, the spiritual science field for more than 25 years. And so his knowledge that exists widely across the internet, and I found on YouTube on accident, we are getting permission to show you some of this content in its pure form. So although Dr. Gilbert is now a close personal friend and would do this podcast in a heartbeat, the information is just so beautifully put in this video that I have clipped for you. But a short introduction. People didn't believe me when I told them I had become a shaman over those past 2 years because no, I didn't go to South America and study for 10 years. I did study with my First Nation teacher who's of Inuit descent, and he's the keeper of knowledge. I did study with Vedic masters, and of course, before embarking on the journey that I did in 2020 when my whole life fell apart, losing my job, my marriage, my home, all of that, I had been teaching yoga and meditation for several years since 2014. So I was not glamorous in my meditations up until 2020 when everything fell apart. And I believe that is because the false identity I had created in that life that was so put together was keeping me from seeing who I actually was, which is a shaman and a healer. And when everything fell apart and I had no choice but to tune in to a higher power through meditation, that's when all was revealed. And I know that many people are coming into meditation and after experiencing trauma of their own and actually accessing gifts from, for example, the goddess Isis, or communing with ancestors. And so it's not just me, and these people are finding that they're star seeds, they're healers, they're shaman, they're medicine people, they're Reiki masters. There is so much that is being revealed to us in our current state of consciousness as evolved humans. And what Dr. Gilbert explains in the next video is our soul's evolution and how initiations used to happen, how you used to become a shaman and a guru, and how that has changed to this point in time. So I'm very excited to show you Dr. Gilbert and introduce you to him, my very dear friend. And you should know that he's a world-renowned scholar and a master instructor in the field of biogeometry, which is a breakthrough vibrational science, which brings ancient Egyptian hidden knowledge into modern practical application. So it really is stuff you can use in your daily practice. And he was also the first non-Egyptian authorized to teach biogeometry by the founder himself, Dr. Ibrahim Karim, who himself is in Egypt, who's an Egyptian. He's also the creator, like I said, of the show Sacred Geometry on the Gaia Network, which you can access yourself right now, and has 25 plus years as a teacher of the original European Rosicrucian and Holy Grail traditions. He is the keeper of all the lost knowledge, and he boils it down for you to use these practices in your practice of being a healer, a shaman, the creator of your own reality. So, without further ado, the founder of the Vesica Institute and a gift to the world, Dr. Robert J. Gilbert. Enjoy.
So let's take a look at the different pieces of this puzzle about how consciousness and initiation have changed from ancient to modern times. One thing that you will find as you read some of the most ancient texts that exist on the planet, the ancient texts from India and from the Near East, etc., you will find that time and again they describe the spiritual world as something that human beings can clearly and directly perceive with no difficulty. They are constantly perceiving non-physical realities and non-physical spiritual beings, because in ancient times there was a type of effortless clairvoyance to be able to perceive non-physical realities. There were activated organs of spiritual perception that were natural to human beings at that stage of development. Now there are still holdovers of this early original form of clairvoyance, what the Rosicrucians in Europe call atavistic clairvoyance, on the part of certain native traditions on the planet. And carried within the bloodline of some of these native traditions is this type of original clairvoyance, where they can still perceive non-physical realities. But for the majority of humanity, we have moved forward on the path of evolution to where we have lost direct perception of spiritual realities today. So this was so extreme in early times in human evolution that the spiritual world was seen as our true home, whereas the physical world was considered, for example in the Indian school, to be an illusion, to be Maya, and that we need to stop taking action in the physical world. Because these schools teach that with every action that you take in the physical world, you generate karma. And the karma keeps pulling you back into future incarnations. Well, they want to get away from physical incarnation. There's no understanding for the purpose of human physical incarnation within these schools. So they teach to get off the cycle, the wheel of karma and reincarnation, and go back to nirvana, to go back to the original spiritual world. Now, this was connected to the fact that with this early form of clairvoyance, human beings were not as self-aware at that time as they are today. At that time, humans primarily identified with a group consciousness, not so much as an individual. So at the time of earlier traditions, we find that when human beings wanted to undergo processes of spiritual education and to be initiated, to be able to develop a clear understanding and interaction with spiritual realities, that virtually universally in the ancient world, a human being needed to join one specific organization and pledge allegiance to one particular spiritual teacher for the rest of their lives. The guru would be able to guide your spiritual development and give you practices to do, and basically guide your life in every single way, in a way that could be effective, and that was, in many cases, quite appropriate in earlier times of human development. However, it would be very rare for the guru to actually explain the reasons for what they were doing. And even today, in some traditions, particularly in the East, they'll talk about the crazy wisdom of the guru. They're doing all these things to wake you up and put you on the spiritual path, but they're not going to explain what they're doing. You just have to assume the guru knows what they're doing and everything's on the up and up. Well, unfortunately, in modern times, we have found time and time again that gurus have misused their authority. This didn't really shift in human development until the time of Gautama Buddha. Gautama Buddha begins to speak as an individual person. And you also have then the development of the Roman Empire, where the Roman emperors become so egotistical that they begin to proclaim that they themselves, in their own personal identity, are gods. Now, this is a process that has many different aspects to it. One aspect is that we're beginning to contract our etheric life body, our subtle body of life forces, so it's contracted further into the physical body. As we contract further into ourselves, we become more self-aware. And again, that contraction allowed us to use the physical brain in a way that was crystal clear from modern logical thinking. We began to get a deeper sense of spiritual self-awareness, but we lost our direct spiritual perception of higher worlds. And this shows a tremendous shift in human consciousness, to where no longer is there the claim to authority because I am now the vehicle of this higher spiritual being, but I myself am stepping forward to directly perceive non-physical realities. And so one of the things that developed was the development of certain rituals through which there would be the attempt to bring non-physical beings into direct manifestation where they could be seen on the physical plane with the physical eyes. Now you find this, for example, prominently in the ancient Judaic tradition. And so if you read the Book of Kings in the Old Testament, it gives you all these specifics about the building of the Temple of Solomon. They're very specific about this was built on a particular power spot for the whole planet. And then they built it with particular types of materials brought from particular places on the earth, like the cedars of Lebanon, that would have the right resonant qualities to work with and amplify the energies of that spiritual power spot. And then they had to be put into the correct form, so that Hiram had to be brought in as the master architect to design it. And it had specific dimensions with sacred geometry built into the building that are given directly in the Book of Kings. Within this structure of the old Temple of Solomon was then a form of the Holy of Holies. Holy of Holies is a great cubical room that was open on one side. And the side it was open, there was a great veil in front of it. We'll talk more about that later. But for right now, the thing to know is that in that Holy of Holies, that cubical space that was developed, the high priest at a particular time of year would do a certain ritual. And that would allow high spiritual beings to manifest directly into the physical space to physical vision. And the Book of Kings, it says the seraphim can manifest into the space. Well, that's mystery language, because the seraphim are understood in the initiate tradition as being the highest of the 9 ranks of the angelic hierarchies. So what they're telling you is that the highest of the angelic hierarchies could actually manifest into the physical space by the way that they had developed the vibrational harmonics of this location. So that's a particular type of spiritual practice to make the spiritual visible here on the physical plane. This has actually shifted over time, so that now we have the capacity for human beings to develop a new form of clairvoyance, and we can actually raise our awareness up toward the spiritual worlds and spiritual beings themselves, not try to pull them down to physical appearance on the physical plane, but to move our own consciousness up to perceive them directly in their own realms. The task today is to awaken a spiritual awareness, a spiritual consciousness within the self-awareness that we have now developed. And in a number of native traditions around the world, their initiations will often be connected to the ingestion of psychoactive substances. So whether it's peyote or ayahuasca or whatever it might be, these particular substances, if you looked at the actual effect they have on the energy field, what they do is they expand the human life body to spread further outside of the physical body. And it activates the energy centers of the body in doing so. And with the life body now being further expanded outside of the physical body, it opens up those organs of spiritual perception again. In the Rosicrucian tradition of Europe, there are particular esoteric names given to all of the angelic hierarchies, all the different ranks of the angelic beings. And the human race also has its own esoteric name. And so the Rosicrucians refer to the human race as the spirits of love and freedom. And so love is the power of union. It pulls us together and merge with other beings. And then freedom is the power of independence, to step forward as a separate, autonomous being. So we are spirits of love and freedom, and we have the gift and the challenge to find a way to alchemically merge these two gifts of love and freedom, of unity and separateness together into a new dynamic. That's the purpose of our evolution here. Now, this new clairvoyance is a kind of return of the clairvoyance we had in ancient times, where you could directly perceive non-physical beings and realities. However, the new clairvoyance is actually regaining that capacity at a higher octave. It's like evolution is a spiral. Many traditions talk about this. And you go all the way around the cycle, and then when you come back, you actually come back to the same place in the cycle, but at a higher octave, and with new abilities having been gained. There's many people today teaching things in modern metaphysical circles that basically present the development of spiritual faculties as a movement backward to what we used to have. But in fact, that's not the natural progression for the human race today. The natural progression is to use what we have developed over a long time of very hard work, which is our ability to think logically and linearly, to have fully conscious, self-aware thinking. That is actually going to become the foundation for a new form of clairvoyance. Our new form of clairvoyance will be self-aware, which it wasn't in previous times, but also fully illuminated, and we can direct it to any target. It used to be that clairvoyant perceptions just flowed in like we were dreaming all the time in an uncontrolled fashion. Now we're going to have the capacity to control that form of clairvoyance and to direct it in any way that we choose. So this is actually a higher spiritual ability than we had in previous times, capacity, which has a much greater scope and potential than the earlier unconscious clairvoyance, which we had in ancient times before we attained self-awareness. Instead of trying to bring spiritual realities down to the physical plane, where they will present themselves physically to be seen with the physical eyes, as we described before was done thousands of years ago in the Holy of Holies of the Temple of Solomon, with the development of the new clairvoyance, we can now move our awareness up to perceive spiritual beings and realities in their own reality in these higher worlds. This is something that the Rosicrucians refer to as the reversed ritual, because the ritual is exactly opposite or reversed from what it was a few thousand years ago. We're not trying to pull things down to here. We're trying to move our own awareness up with new organs of spiritual perception to perceive the spiritual beings and realities directly, because we have to start moving upward to develop these new faculties and skills. We can't just keep trying to bring those things down, or we'll never develop on the path the way things are meant to progress. So today we have hundreds of millions of people on a personal spiritual path where they are choosing not to give their power away to any particular external guru or institution. Instead, human beings are choosing to use their newly awakened powers of discernment to learn from many different teachers and traditions, and to craft their own spiritual path in the world. This is what we're going to refer to in this class as the independent path of spiritual initiation. Now, we need to be aware that initiation will always involve the participation of higher spiritual beings. That's a given. It's us. However, the thing is that the modern initiate on the independent path of initiation will learn to connect directly to spirit and to the beings involved with the initiation without having to go through a human intermediary or through an intermediary institution or church on the physical plane. So the independent path requires us to have a conscious understanding of these higher spiritual realities, and also for us to understand the full context of the spiritual practices that are open to us today to be able to develop these new organs of direct spiritual perception. So the need for this deeper understanding and for access to full information has developed into what we're calling in this class the new spiritual science. It is a spiritual science that is publicly available, that you don't have to give your power away to an external guru or institution in the hope that they will then share with you their hidden knowledge in exchange for your obedience. That's no longer the modern path. So the new spiritual science is something that is logical, it is linear, it comes from all traditions, and it becomes a composite body of knowledge that gives us a full context to learn from and to choose practices from, so that we can be fully informed and empowered to make decisions. Once we realize that the foundation of everything is that it is crystallized consciousness at different states of awareness and different planes of manifestation, then certain things that are common practices in different spiritual traditions become obvious to us. Of course, it couldn't be any way other than that. So one example of this is that there is a consciousness embedded in everything at some level. This means that since everything is conscious at some level, it can be communicated with. Now that's the understanding that you find in all the different systems and traditions all over the planet of what we call today shamanism. Shamanistic understandings that everything is conscious and everything can be communicated with if you can shift your awareness to its level to communicate with it. This is also the understanding of what's called the animist traditions in Africa and elsewhere. In animism, they say that there is a spirit, a consciousness in everything. So in this rock, in this plant, in the movement of the wind, everything has a consciousness. This teaching of shamanism and animism makes perfect sense if we accept and understand that consciousness is the foundation of all of existence. It's also found in different expressions in every classical spiritual tradition and in the esoteric branch of every religion on the planet. Now, when that pure essence that experiences consciousness inside of us gets expressed externally into the world, it appears as light. Seen from this perspective, all the dimensions, all the spiritual planes being levels of function or activity, states of consciousness within the Godhead itself, all of creation lives within these actual levels of the body of God. Part of modern initiation is to remember and then to directly perceive the divine spirit that's all around us at these different levels of creation. That's that primal memory of where we come from. The physical body comes from the greater physical plane, which is itself the physical body of God. So when we take this to its logical extent, this means that we are going to change, as a person undergoing initiation, our perception of the physical plane from something that's just dead, inert, mineral-like around us, to something that is actually the physical body of God. Everything physical is part of the physical plane of manifestation of the Godhead, and so everything physical that we interact with is literally the physical body of God. And we're talking about the unified source of all creation. Now this brings us to the issue that we described earlier, having to do with this balance between the divine source and our having individual existence in the world. Now, attaining the direct experience of the truth described by the non-dualist traditions, that we all come from this original unified source, is vital for us because it allows us to directly remember, and they're all based on what we referred to before as the universal consciousness field, our true spiritual nature. Now, it can also open up our spiritual ability to communicate with different spiritual beings for practical purposes, which is something done in all schools of initiation. We also live in a world of dualism. Our whole world that we live in the physical plane, is dualistic, and it's been created intentionally to be a plane of separation of one thing from another plane. In that original divine unity, there's not really any movement, because movement's connected to separation. But to have the act of life itself, there has to be movement. And so polarity systems are always based on being attracted or being repelled. And things will move around each other just like the charges in a molecule, in an atom, where you have the movement of the negatively charged electron around the positively charged proton. They have a constant movement and attraction around them. That creates all the activity of the worlds of manifestation. Now, if we do not understand that we are part of this unified reality, that we're from a unified source, and that we're connected with everything else in creation, what happens is that the spiritual knowledge that we begin to develop gets put purely at the service of the human lower ego. Now, again, if we understand that we're all part of that same unity, we tend not to fall into that trap and tend not to generate that type of negative karma.
I could listen forever, but we are about out of time. So what it seems Dr. Gilbert is saying is that once you've remembered your access to all planes of existence, all consciousness is available to you. And with that self-awareness, you begin to influence the polarities in the physical plane. You're now an illuminated creator and manifester, working with those energies. And now it's in your best karmic interests as an individual soul, a unique wave in the ocean of source consciousness, to now shape that reality not in a self-serving way, but in a way that contributes back to the universal field of consciousness, because you know we are all connected. There's no separation. And that's why it's so commendable that I embrace my role as a shaman, and that you are embracing your role as a healer, a shaman, a starseed, a teacher, a leader, by honoring a life of sacred purpose. Not only will you continue to create freedom and abundance in your reality for yourself, but you'll also help others do the same. And that contributes more of that love energy to the collective consciousness and will transition us from this time of confusion and scarcity into a world of community, supportiveness, and abundance, freedom. Why I'm particularly honored to work personally with Dr. Gilbert is because he's a true bodhisattva. He is dedicated not just this lifetime, but all of his lifetimes for bringing you this information, for living in his sacred purpose, combing the world's spiritual traditions and testing out the most practical ways to continue our soul's evolution for the betterment of all. I hope you've enjoyed this episode. Thank you so much for joining me, and we'll hope to see you again. Shine bright, you little light. Dr. Gilbert and the Vesica Institute would like to honor you as well, as not just a viewer of the show, but as a dedicated initiate on the path of enlightenment, by gifting you 23% off every Vesica course besides biogeometry for a limited time. I've started several of these courses, and I have to tell you, each one is so easy to learn. And even though it's so dense with practices, they're very easy to pick up and use in your daily practice for yourself and become a master in your own right, as well as to fully empower the people you serve and give them these practices through your own healing channels. Thank you so much for watching again, and visit vesica.org or click the link in the description box below to claim your discount.